In the burning heart of Sonoma Valley, Elias Ward stood before the vineyard he once swore to restore, now swallowed by flame. A former soldier turned winemaker, he had only wanted peace, a second chance among the vines. But when the truth of Elara, the cursed wine of immortality, was revealed, he made his choice. Better to burn a lie than bottle it. As fire raced through the grapes and the sky turned red with smoke, Elias watched the past turn to ash. And somewhere in the inferno, his loyal German shepherd howled, not in fear, but in farewell. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. The wind over Sonoma Valley carried the bite of early autumn. A dry, restless wind that stirred clouds of ochre dust and whispered across the rows of dead vines like an old confession. The hills rolled in shades of gold and ash, their once green slopes now scarred by drought and neglect. Wooden fences leaned as if tired of standing. The sun hung low, a dim copper coin behind the haze of heat. In the distance, a pickup truck groaned up the narrow dirt road, dragging behind it a trail of dust that curled and lingered like the ghost of something unburied. At the wheel sat Elias Ward, a man who looked carved from the same rugged hills he now crossed. 42, lean but solid, his face carried the tan of a life spent under open skies and the pale scars of shrapnel long healed. His jaw was angular, a faint stubble outlining it in gray. His eyes, steel blue but dulled with exhaustion, held the faraway focus of someone used to watching horizons for threats that no longer came. A faint tremor lived in his left hand, the relic of an explosion in Kandahar 8 years ago, when a door that shouldn't have opened did. Since then, silence had been his medicine, and he'd chased it west until the noise of the world finally faded behind the mountains. In the passenger seat, Roscoe sat upright, a 9-year-old German shepherd whose muzzle had turned the color of frost. His once black saddle had softened to charcoal, his fur thick around a proud neck, his chest broad, his eyes amber and patient. He bore himself with the quiet dignity of a retired soldier, the same kind of grace Elias imagined his own father must have had before the war stole his laughter. Roscoe's ears flicked with every gust of wind, every shifting sound in the valley, as if still searching for survivors in a field of ruin. The truck reached the crest of a hill, and there it was. The Devereux Vineyard. A patchwork of decay stretched beneath them, rows of twisted vines that clung to the earth like the hands of the dead, an old stone house with windows boarded from the inside, and a collapsed windmill that groaned when the wind struck it right. The land was overgrown, but not with life. Weeds sprouted through the cracked soil, and a rusted sign lay half buried near the gate, its faded letters barely legible. Dove. Weck Cellars, East 1894. Elias stopped the truck and stepped out. His boots sank into the dust with a muffled crunch. He took in the sight quietly, his breath slow, his shoulders broad but slumped slightly under invisible weight. He had seen worse. Villages burned, cities in ruin. But there was something about the stillness of this place that felt heavier than war. Roscoe jumped down beside him, sniffed the dry air, and let out a short huff, as if unimpressed by the long-promised peace. "Here we are, partner," Elias said softly, his voice low and roughened by disuse. Home. The word hung uncertainly in the air. Home was a foreign country, one he hadn't visited since the day his wife's photograph burned in a house fire while he was stationed overseas. That day had carved a hollow in him that no metal could fill. The vineyard, cheap and forgotten, was supposed to be a way to build something again, something quiet enough for ghosts to rest. He walked past the first row of vines, the dry branches crackling under his gloved hands. A faint sweetness lingered in the air, the ghost of fermented grapes long gone. He traced a finger along a post scarred by years of wind, then turned toward the main house. The wooden porch moaned beneath his weight. A colony of swallows had built nests under the eaves, and one darted out, brushing his shoulder before vanishing into the open sky. Inside, dust lay thick as snow. The furniture was gone. Only outlines on the floor remained where tables once stood. The scent of old wood and mildew filled the air. He set down his duffel and looked around. The fireplace was blackened, the mantel carved with initials, DD 1927. He imagined the Devereaux family, hands stained with wine, laughter echoing between barrels, before time and ruin swallowed them whole. Roscoe padded behind him, nails tapping against the worn boards. He sniffed every corner, tail low but wagging faintly, his curiosity undimmed by age. In a room off to the side, Elias found a heavy wooden trap door, its hinges sealed with a chain and a rusted padlock. A small brass plate above it read, "Cellar." He crouched down, touched the lock. It crumbled slightly under his fingers, flaking rust like dried blood. "Not yet," he murmured, standing. "We'll get to that later." They spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning. Elias swept dust into clouds that caught the fading sunlight like smoke. Roscoe nosed through the debris, sneezing at the smell of age. As the light shifted from gold to rust, Elias fixed a leak in the roof, hammered loose boards into place, and repaired the pump that still wheezed faintly by the porch. The rhythm of labor calmed him. Build, mend, repeat. The same kind of order he once found in marching drills. By sundown, sweat streaked his temples, and the ache in his shoulders felt almost like forgiveness. He ate his dinner outside, canned beans, bread, a flask of water. Roscoe lay beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but always alert. The sky burned orange, then purple, and finally bled into black. The valley darkened slowly, swallowing color until only the faint outlines of the hills remained. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, its cry carrying across the emptiness. Elias leaned back against the porch post and looked out across his new kingdom of ruin. The vines swayed gently in the night breeze, skeletal and beautiful in their stubbornness. He wondered how many years it would take to bring them back, how many seasons before the land remembered how to live again. Then the wind shifted. It came cold and sudden, rolling down from the high ridge with the scent of something sharp and sour. Smoke and wine, faint but unmistakable. Roscoe lifted his head, ears pricked, nostrils twitching. He let out a low growl deep in his chest, the kind of sound that came from instinct, not reason. Elias frowned, scanning the dark. The horizon was empty, the sky showed no fire, and yet the smell lingered, a ghost of fermentation, burned sugar and oak, the scent of a vintage that should not exist. He rose slowly, his hand brushing the scar on his forearm, where shrapnel had once torn through muscle. "Easy," he said to the dog, though his own heartbeat had begun to race. Roscoe stood now, fur bristling slightly, staring toward the lower field where the ground dipped into shadow. For a long while they stayed like that, man and dog, framed by the skeletons of vines and the hollow wind, listening to a silence too full to be empty. The smell faded, but the memory of it clung to Elias's mind, familiar in a way that made his stomach tighten. Smoke and wine, destruction and beauty, the past, returning. He exhaled and sat down again, pulling his jacket tight as the first chill of night settled. Roscoe circled once and lay at his feet, sighing deeply as if conceding that peace, for now, was real enough to rest upon. Above them, the stars broke through the haze one by one, scattered like pale seeds across the black. The vineyard slept. And yet, as Elias closed his eyes, he could have sworn he heard something beneath the soil, a heartbeat under the dust, slow and patient, waiting for someone to listen. The mornings in Sonoma began with the sound of wind combing through the brittle vines, a low, steady sigh that felt almost human. Days passed quietly, uncounted. Elias woke with the sun and worked until the light drained away, a man held together by repetition. He repaired fences, scraped mold from barrels, patched holes in the roof where rain had once bled through. The vineyard, in its ruined grace, responded with indifference. It neither welcomed him nor resisted him. It simply waited. Roscoe moved like a shadow at his heel, always watching, always measuring the distance between calm and danger. The old shepherd had grown used to the rhythm of Elias's hammer, the scent of sawdust and dry soil, the occasional pause when his master would stand motionless, lost in a memory he never spoke of. Sometimes Elias caught himself murmuring to ghosts, his wife, his squad, a life that had gone missing somewhere between one explosion and another. Roscoe would rest his chin on his boot, grounding him back to now. Each afternoon, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Heat shimmered over the hills, turning the air to glass. The smell of wild sage mingled with old oak. And yet, beneath it all, there lingered a faint sweetness, fermented, sorrowful, the scent of wine that no longer existed. On the third evening since his arrival, Elias approached the hulk of the old wine house. Its walls were thick stone, mottled with moss, and ivy clawed across the roof like veins. Near the center of the floor lay the same cement-sealed cellar door, the one he had found in the main house, but here reinforced with iron bolts sunk deep into the stone. The wooden frame above it bore a single burned inscription: Elara, 1984. The letters were carved deep, as if the name itself had been branded there to warn rather than remember. Elias knelt beside it, brushing away dust. Elara, he read aloud, the syllables strange on his tongue. Roscoe tilted his head, ears perked, and sniffed at the seams of the cement. The dog gave a soft whine and scratched once, then pulled back, tail low. "Yeah, I don't like it either," Elias muttered. He stood and circled the building, checking for cracks or vents that might explain the odd smell. Near the rear wall, beneath a broken window, he noticed a faint discoloration, a darker patch of cement that glistened ever so slightly. Moisture. He crouched and touched it. His fingertips came away, sticky, faintly tinted red-brown. He rubbed them together, frowned, and sniffed. The scent was unmistakable. Wine, aged, sharp, and strangely metallic. That night, the moon rose round and heavy, the color of tarnished brass. The valley shimmered in its pale glow, and every object seemed to carry its own breath of silver. Elias sat on the porch cleaning his old rifle, though there was nothing to hunt. Roscoe lay nearby, ears twitching. The silence was so complete that even the crickets seemed reluctant to disturb it. Then Roscoe stiffened. His head lifted, ears slicing the air. A low growl formed in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Elias whispered, setting down the weapon. The dog moved to the doorway, gaze fixed towards the wine house. The fur along his spine bristled. Elias followed, the flashlight cold and heavy in his hand. The moment he stepped outside, he felt it too. A pulse beneath the ground, faint, rhythmic, like something breathing deep within the soil. The air smelled of wet stone and iron. Roscoe led the way, silent now, body low and tense. When they reached the sealed cellar, the sound grew clearer. Drip. Pause. Drip. Each drop echoed in the silence, slow but relentless, a heart beating in the dark. Elias pressed his ear against the cement. The vibration was subtle but real, like the murmur of underground water, or something thicker. He lifted his head, exhaling slowly. "Just groundwater," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Roscoe didn't move. The shepherd began to scratch at the corner of the frame, claws clicking against stone. Elias swung the beam of his flashlight along the wall and caught a flicker, a brief glint of metal behind a hairline crack in the mortar. He leaned closer. Through the narrow gap, something reflective caught the light and threw it back. A curved surface, brass or copper, faintly green with oxidation. He tried to widen the crack with his knife, but the cement held firm. Instead, he shone the beam directly into it. For a second, he thought he saw liquid glimmering below, rippling in the reflection, though the air above it was perfectly still. And then the smell hit him. A sudden rush of old wine, sour and potent, mixed with the faint, unmistakable bite of smoke. He staggered back, coughing. Roscoe barked sharply, startled by the scent. It came and went like a memory, gone before he could place it. Elias turned off the flashlight and stood there in the moonlight, chest rising and falling. The wind whispered through the vines, carrying the dry rattle of leaves. The pulse beneath the ground had stopped, or maybe it had simply learned to match his own heartbeat. He crouched to Roscoe's level and stroked the dog's back. "Whatever's down there," he said quietly. "We'll deal with it in the morning." Roscoe's tail gave a single, uncertain wag. He followed Elias back toward the house, but kept glancing over his shoulder, ears half-cocked, nostrils flaring as though the night itself had changed flavor. Later, lying in bed with the window open to the cooling air, Elias found sleep difficult. The silence pressed close, heavy and alive. Every few minutes he thought he heard the faint drip, drip, again, echoing through the wood floorboards. Once he sat up, certain he'd heard Roscoe pacing in the hallway, but when he checked, the dog was lying still, eyes open, staring toward the direction of the cellar. Just before dawn, a thin mist crept up from the valley, wrapping the vineyard in pale gauze. Elias stood at the window, watching it curl between the vines like smoke from an unseen fire. He could almost believe the land was breathing again, waking from a long sleep. But the scent that drifted through the open pane was not of dew or earth. It was wine, fresh and bitter, as if poured only moments ago. He looked down to where Roscoe sat at his feet, ears flat, tail rigid. The dog let out a quiet, uneasy whine. Elias whispered, more to himself than to the dog, "It's starting to remember." Outside, the vines shivered without wind. The morning came with a dull gray sky that hung low over Sonoma, heavy with the promise of rain, but never delivering it. The vines trembled slightly in the cold air, whispering like old bones. Elias stood before the sealed cellar, his breath fogging in the dim light that filtered through the broken window panes. For days he had walked past that cement patch, feeling its presence beneath his boots like a pulse under skin. But this morning, something in him had shifted. Maybe it was the sleepless nights, or the way Roscoe now refused to sleep anywhere but by that door, his body tensed as though guarding something alive. Elias rolled up his sleeves. The air was cold enough to bite, yet sweat had already begun to gather under his collar. He grabbed the chisel and hammer he'd taken from the shed and knelt at the corner of the slab. Roscoe sat nearby, watching, his ears tilted forward, tail still. "All right, partner," Elias murmured. "Let's see what you've been worried about." The first strike rang through the empty winehouse like a gunshot. Dust puffed from the crack, drifting upward in lazy spirals. Elias struck again, then again, his blows steady, deliberate. Each impact seemed to echo longer than it should have, like the earth itself was hollow. Roscoe shifted uneasily, giving a low whine that trembled between warning and anticipation. After an hour, a faint line of separation formed near the edge. Elias wedged the chisel deeper, prying until a slab the size of a door gave a dull groan and broke loose. He coughed as the smell rushed out. Stale air mixed with the heavy, fermented sweetness of wine and mold. The scent was overwhelming, ancient, intimate, as if 100 seasons had been trapped beneath and were now exhaling at once. He swept away the debris. Beneath the cracked cement, a wooden staircase descended into darkness, each step slick with years of condensation. Elias aimed his flashlight down, the beam cut through dust thick as fog, catching glimpses of cobwebs, rusted railings, and the faint shimmer of glass. He hesitated, then looked to Roscoe. The shepherd's eyes gleamed amber in the beam, his head tilted slightly forward, ready. "Guess we're going in," Elias said. The steps creaked under his boots, the sound swallowed quickly by the air below. The temperature dropped as they descended. The cool dampness clung to his skin. Roscoe followed close behind, nails clicking on the wood. When they reached the bottom, Elias swept the light across the space and stopped breathing. The cellar was immense, easily the size of a small barn. Rows of wine racks stretched to the far wall, heavy with bottles coated in dust and cobwebs. Some had collapsed, spilling their contents across the stone floor, where shattered glass glimmered like dark jewels. The labels, once white, were now yellowed and peeling. The ink almost vanished, except for one word that appeared over and over in faded gold script: Elara. The name seemed to hum faintly in the silence. Elias moved closer, brushing his gloved fingers across one of the bottles. The corks were dry and crumbling, but the liquid inside was still, dense, opaque, almost black. 30, 40 years at least, he muttered. Hell of a cellar. Roscoe sniffed the air, then padded toward the far wall. Elias followed, the flashlight's beam catching a flicker of something on the plaster, markings, barely visible under grime. He knelt, wiping at the wall with a rag. Beneath the soot, strange diagrams emerged. Circles, chemical notations, enzyme chains drawn in precise black ink, half of them smeared by what looked like wine or rust. Between them, in uneven handwriting, someone had scrawled words. Elara is life. Life must be refined. A chill crawled up Elias's spine. He traced a formula with his finger, one line labeled fermentation, another metabolic enhancement. It wasn't simple winemaking. Whoever had worked here hadn't been crafting flavor. They'd been experimenting. Jesus, he whispered. Near the center of the room stood a large fermentation vat, its surface cracked and scarred. A small dark trickle had dried along its side, congealed into something tar-like. Roscoe approached it, sniffed once, and licked the seam where the wood had split. Elias turned sharply. "Roscoe, no!" But it was too late. The dog pulled back, licking his muzzle, ears flattening. The beam of light caught the spill as it oozed again, thick and black-red, glistening like old blood. For a second Elias thought it reflected the flashlight, but the sheen pulsed faintly, almost alive. The smell hit him, sweet, rotten, metallic. He staggered back a step, hand covering his mouth. The scent wasn't just wine. It was something fouler, something that didn't belong to fruit or earth. Then his light found the object lying beside the vat. A book bound in red leather, small enough to fit in one hand, its cover warped by damp. Elias crouched and picked it up carefully. The leather cracked at the edges, the clasp tarnished with green corrosion. He opened it, and the musty air filled his nose. Inside, the handwriting was elegant but hurried, the ink brown with age. The first page bore a single signature: Dorian Devereux, 1984. He turned the page and read aloud, the words catching in his throat. Elara is not merely a wine. It is the breath of the soil itself, the life that flows beneath us. To bottle it is to trap the spirit of the valley. But that spirit demands purity. A heart clouded by greed will poison the harvest. A heart impure will wither at the taste. Elias stopped reading. The letters swam slightly, as if the ink refused to stay still. His pulse thudded in his ears. He flipped through more pages: chemical ratios, journal notes, strange references to enzyme resonance, and harvest sacrifice. In the margins, the handwriting grew erratic, trembling. The final entry was a single sentence, carved so deep into the paper it tore through. Elara does not forgive. He closed the book, his hands shaking. Roscoe whimpered softly beside him, pawing at his boot. The dog's tongue flicked against his muzzle, and Elias saw it, the faintest stain of black along the fur near his mouth. "Damn it," Elias muttered, crouching to wipe it away with his sleeve. The residue smeared like ink, leaving a faint shimmer before vanishing. Roscoe blinked, calm again, but something in his gaze had changed. It was sharper, more alert, like a wire pulled too tight. Elias stood in the dim glow of his flashlight, the cellar silent except for the distant drip of liquid somewhere in the dark. The walls seemed closer now, the air thicker. He looked down at the red journal, then toward the rows of bottles labeled Elara. "What the hell were you people making down here?" he whispered. The light flickered once, then steadied. Roscoe's eyes caught the reflection, twin embers burning low. And from deep within one of the sealed barrels, something shifted. A soft pop, like air escaping from a throat. By late afternoon, the storm came crawling over the valley like a beast with too many lungs. The air grew thick, humming with tension, and the first drop of rain hit the tin roof with a metallic ping that carried through the silence. Elias had been mending a broken shutter when the wind picked up, scattering dead leaves across the porch. Roscoe was already uneasy, pacing, whining low, his fur standing in uneasy ridges. Storms never frightened him before, not even thunder, but this one seemed different. It was the kind that made the earth hold its breath. When lightning flashed across the western ridge, Elias saw the vineyards blur into waves of gray, the sky split open in a white scream. Then came the sound, a high, unnatural screech followed by the crunch of metal against wood. Roscoe barked sharply, bolting towards the hill road. Elias grabbed his coat and followed, boots sinking into the mud as rain began to pour in heavy sheets. Down by the old fence line, a car had crashed through the rails, its front end buried in the earth, steam hissing from the crumpled hood. The headlights cut wild cones through the rain, flickering against the vines. Elias ran closer, shielding his eyes. Inside, through a cracked windshield, he saw movement. A figure slumped forward, struggling weakly. He yanked open the door. "Hey, you all right?" The woman inside looked up, dazed, her face pale against the shadows. She couldn't have been more than 29, her features fine-boned and sharp in the flicker of lightning. Isabella Moreau, as he would later learn, had the kind of beauty that seemed carved from worry. Dark chestnut hair plastered against her face, olive skin gone ashen, lips trembling with effort. Her clothes, a tailored beige trench coat now soaked through, clung to her like another skin. In her right hand, she clutched a slender glass vial sealed with wax, the liquid inside a deep garnet red that caught the flash of lightning like blood. "Help me," she gasped, voice roughened by exhaustion and fear. "Please, it can't break." Elias reached in, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Hold still, you're bleeding." "I'm fine," she whispered. "Just don't let it spill." Her fingers tightened protectively around the vial, even as her body sagged toward him. He lifted her from the seat, surprised by how light she was, and carried her towards the house. Roscoe trotted behind, barking once, then falling silent as if understanding the gravity of what followed them. By the time Elias got her inside, the rain had turned violent, hammering the windows in waves. He set her on the old couch near the fireplace and threw a blanket over her. Her skin burned beneath his touch. Fever. Her pulse fluttered beneath her wrist like a bird trying to escape a cage. "Stay awake," he said, kneeling beside her. "What's your name?" She blinked slowly, her voice faint. "Izzy. Isabella Moreau." "French?" A small nod. "From Bordeaux. I study enology, wine science." She tried to smile, but it faltered halfway, lost to the tremor in her body. "I was coming to find—" Her words broke into a coughing fit, and she clutched the vial tighter, holding it to her chest, as if it were the only thing keeping her alive. Roscoe approached, tail low, head tilted. His amber eyes reflected the firelight as he stepped between them. Protective, cautious. He gave a single, deep bark that sounded more like a question. "It's all right, boy," Elias said quietly. "She's not trouble." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure. There was something unsettling about her presence, the way she seemed both fragile and unyielding, the fevered gleam in her eyes that was not entirely from sickness. Elias fetched a pot of water and some old medical supplies he kept from his service days. When he returned, Izzy was muttering softly in French, the words spilling out like prayers. He caught fragments. "Terre, souffle, Elara." "What did you say?" he asked, dabbing at the cut on her forehead. Her gaze drifted toward him, unfocused but intent. "Elara never dies," she murmured. "It only sleeps." The words froze him. The name, Elara, the same one carved above the cellar door, the same one on every bottle below. He sat back slowly, searching her face. "What do you know about Elara?" But she didn't answer. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped against the pillow, breathing unevenly. The vial slipped from her grasp, rolling across the blanket until it stopped against Roscoe's paw. The dog stared at it, unmoving, as if recognizing something ancient. Elias picked it up carefully. The glass was warm to the touch, the liquid inside shimmering faintly with a dark iridescence. It smelled faintly of grapes, and something else, something metallic and alive. He sealed it inside an old wooden box, setting it on the shelf away from the fire. Then he sat beside her until her breathing steadied. Outside, thunder cracked, and the house shook. Roscoe settled at her bedside, his head resting on his paws, his ears twitching at every sound. Through the long hours of night, Elias kept the fire alive and watched the storm tear across the valley. He tried not to think about the cellar, or the bottles, or the words in Dorian's journal. But Izzy's voice lingered, soft and certain. "It only sleeps." Near midnight she stirred, whispering in her sleep. "The soil remembers. It calls us back." Roscoe lifted his head, growling low toward the window, though there was nothing outside but rain. Elias reached down to calm him, his hand trembling slightly. He didn't know what kind of trouble had found them, only that it had arrived wrapped in thunder and wine. As the storm began to fade, the world grew quiet again. Elias leaned back in his chair, exhausted. Roscoe still refused to leave the woman's side. The dog's eyes glowed faintly in the dying firelight, reflecting both suspicion and something softer, pity, perhaps, or recognition. Outside, the vineyard glistened under the storm's residue, rows of vines bowing under the weight of water. In the distance, thunder rolled once more, a farewell or a warning, and somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, in the sealed cellar below, a faint pop echoed, as if a cork had been pulled free after years of waiting. Morning broke pale and uneasy over Sonoma. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the valley slick and shining, every vine trembling with droplets that caught the weak sunlight like cold glass. The air was still, too still, and the silence in the vineyard felt deliberate, as if the land itself was listening. Inside the house, the fire had burned low. Elias sat at the edge of the table, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the small wooden box that held Izzy's vial. Roscoe lay under the window, his tail thumping faintly, gaze never straying far from the box. Behind them, a faint rustle. Izzy stirred on the couch, groaning softly as she pushed herself upright. The fever had left her skin glistening with a thin sheen of sweat. Her hair, dark chestnut and tangled, fell around her face in uneven waves. Her eyes, though rimmed red from exhaustion, were alert now, sharp with a scientist's precision. Elias turned. "You're awake?" She nodded, her voice husky. "I should thank you. You could have left me out there." "I almost did," he said flatly. "But my dog disagreed." Roscoe gave a low huff, as if confirming it. Izzy smiled faintly, though the expression barely reached her eyes. She glanced around the room, her gaze lingering on the box near Elias's hand. "You kept it safe." He studied her a long moment. "You want to tell me what the hell that is?" Izzy looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment she said nothing. Then, quietly, "It's what they're all looking for. What they'd kill for." "Who's they?" "Viridian Cellars," she said, the name like a wound reopened. "You've heard of them?" Elias shook his head. "Big company?" "More than that," she replied. "They own almost half the vineyards along the Pacific coast. They call themselves winemakers, but that's a disguise. They're researchers, geneticists. I worked for them for 6 years." Her voice changed then, tighter, controlled, as if she'd rehearsed this confession in her head 100 times. "I joined right out of the University of Bordeaux. My specialty was enzymatic fermentation, how microscopic proteins can change the flavor, texture, even the lifespan of wine. Viridian funded everything, labs, equipment, grants. They said we were reviving lost winemaking traditions. But it was never about flavor. It was about control." Elias leaned back, frowning. "Control?" "They called the project Elara," she continued, her accent thickening slightly as emotion crept into her tone. "It began as an attempt to synthesize a self-sustaining enzyme, a living catalyst from a mutated strain of grape DNA found in an old French cellar destroyed in the war. But the enzyme was unstable. It bonded with human cells. Slowly, silently. And after 20 years, it started to kill them. Cellular collapse. Like the body was being devoured from within." She rubbed her temples, trembling slightly. "When the government learned what Viridian was doing, they shut it down, destroyed the research. At least, that's what everyone thought. But 2 years ago, I found out they'd restarted the project under a new name, Project Revival. They're not trying to destroy Elara anymore. They're trying to perfect it. They want to turn it into a vintage for immortality, a wine that can make the wealthy live longer, stronger, beyond nature's reach." Elias said nothing for a long moment. Outside, the wind creaked through the empty vines. Finally, he muttered, "That sounds like madness." "It is," she said, meeting his eyes. "But madness backed by money doesn't stop. It evolves." He stood, pacing toward the window. So you stole it? The enzyme data, Izzy nodded, and a small sample. The vial you found. It's a live culture, the last one of its kind. Her gaze hardened. If Viridian finds me, they'll take it, and they'll kill anyone who's seen it. Elias stared at her reflection in the window pane, her words colliding with the memory of the red leather journal. He crossed the room, opened the desk drawer, and pulled it out. The cover creaked softly as he laid it before her. Dorian Devereaux, he said. Name mean anything to you? Izzy blinked, startled. Where did you? Found it in the cellar, he said. This was his vineyard once. She took the journal, flipping through the brittle pages. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read the cramped handwriting, the diagrams, the ratios. Then she stopped. My God, she whispered. These equations, they're the same base formula. This is the original, the prototype work. The Devereaux family must have been experimenting long before Viridian. Elias watched her, his jaw tight. Then maybe this was always cursed. She didn't disagree. Her finger traced a final line near the back, her lips moving as she read aloud. Elara is sin, aged in oak. Her voice caught on the words. He knew. He saw what it became. For a moment, neither spoke. The house seemed to absorb their silence, every board and beam listening. Roscoe rose suddenly, padding toward the cellar door. He stopped there, tail stiff, head tilted as if hearing something below. Then a low rumble began in his throat. Elias turned sharply. What is it, boy? Roscoe pawed at the floorboards, claws clicking, whining softly. His body was tense but not fearful. Alert, protective. Izzy's face drained of color. Something's awake down there. Probably rats, Elias said automatically, though even he didn't believe it. The cellar had gone untouched for decades. Nothing alive should have survived in that damp tomb. But then the air shifted. A faint smell drifted upward through the cracks. Sweet, cloying, unmistakably familiar. Wine. Only this time, it carried an undertone of iron, thick and metallic. Izzy looked toward the floor, eyes wide. It's responding to the enzyme. It knows I'm here. Elias grabbed the shotgun from the corner, checking the chamber. I don't care if it's the devil himself, he said quietly. He's staying in the cellar. Roscoe growled again, staring at the boards, and for a heartbeat, Elias thought he saw them move. Just a fraction, as if something below had breathed. Izzy pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Elias, she whispered, you don't understand. Elara isn't just a formula, it's alive. Thunder rolled far off over the valley. Roscoe barked once, sharp and low. Elias stood frozen, listening to the pulse that seemed to echo faintly through the floor, a rhythm like a heart that refused to stop beating. The morning came sharp and clean after a night that refused to rest. The mist still clung to the vines, soft and low, the sun fighting to burn through but never quite winning. Elias was outside mending the fence line when he saw the car. Sleek, black, too new for these roads, rolling up the dirt path with the hum of money. Dust rose in its wake, catching in the pale light like smoke. Roscoe growled before the engine even stopped, his body stiff, ears pricked, eyes locked on the strangers stepping out. 3 men, all dressed the same, dark suits, black coats, polished shoes that had never seen real soil. Their smiles were polite, practiced, but their eyes were wrong, flat, metallic, unblinking, like glass covering something mechanical. The one in front, tall and narrow-faced with neatly combed silver hair, approached first. His posture was military, but his voice was velvet. Mr. Ward, I presume? He said. I'm Samuel Grant, Regional Compliance Officer for Viridian Cellars. My associates, Mr. Colton and Mr. Reese." The two behind him nodded in silence. Colton was heavy-set, mid-40s, his neck thick, jaw shaved too close, eyes small and calculating. Reese, younger, lean, with a smirk that never touched his gaze. They looked more like agents than inspectors. Elias wiped his hands on his jeans. "You're on private property," he said flatly. "We're aware," Grant replied smoothly, glancing at the vineyard behind him. "Beautiful piece of land. Shame it's fallen into such disrepair. Viridian has a vested interest in the Devereaux estate. Historical ties, you could say." Elias crossed his arms. "Not for sale." "We're not here to buy, Mr. Ward," Grant said, his smile widening just enough to show teeth. "We're here to ensure everything on this property is in compliance with state safety regulations. There have been reports of environmental contamination, unusual fermentation runoff, possibly hazardous." Elias's jaw tightened. "Reports? From who?" Grant's smile never wavered. "Anonymous sources. We take such matters seriously." Behind him, Reese circled toward the side of the barn, pretending to admire the vineyard while subtly scanning the area. Colton stood silent, one hand tucked into his coat, eyes moving like a predator's. Elias caught himself stepping slightly sideways, placing his body between them and the house. Inside, he knew Izzy was watching through the curtains. "The vineyard isn't open to the public," Elias said. "You'll need a warrant if you want to step further." "Oh, we have the paperwork," Grant said, patting his jacket pocket but not producing anything. "But we'd prefer to handle this amicably. You strike me as a reasonable man." His voice softened just enough to sound rehearsed. "After all, we're all caretakers of history here. Sometimes history carries volatile remnants." Elias met his stare. "This history stays buried." The silver-haired man's smile faltered just a fraction, then returned. "Of course," he said, stepping back. "We'll return with the appropriate authorization. Have a pleasant day, Mr. Ward." They left as quietly as they'd come, the black car disappearing into the dust like a shadow sinking into the earth. But even after they were gone, the air didn't feel empty. It felt watched. That night, the quiet was heavier than usual. Izzy sat at the kitchen table, her hands gripping a cup of untouched tea, eyes unfocused. "They found me," she whispered. "They never stopped looking." Elias loaded shells into the shotgun without a word. "Then we make it hard for them." Roscoe prowled near the back door, restless, tail flicking. His instincts were louder than any words. Around midnight, the hum of an engine drifted faintly through the fields. Elias killed the lights. Through the narrow slit of the curtain, he saw it. A black SUV idling on the road, its headlights off. And then, a flicker of movement in the fog above the vines, a red beam sweeping low, steady, systematic. A drone. It moved in perfect lines over the vineyard, the thin crimson laser slicing through the mist. When it passed near the porch, the beam flashed briefly across Roscoe's eyes, turning them momentarily red like molten glass. The dog growled deep, low, primal. Elias motioned to Izzy. "Downstairs, now." They slipped into the cellar through the narrow trap door, the hinges groaning softly. The air below was cool and stale, the scent of oak and damp stone thick around them. Elias turned on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark toward the far corner, where an old control terminal sat half-buried under dust. The casing was iron, the Devereaux family crest etched faintly across its surface. "What is that?" Izzy whispered. "Security system," Elias said. "Looks like Devereaux had his own eyes down here." He brushed away cobwebs and pressed the switch. For a long moment, nothing. Then a spark, a flicker, and the monitor came to life, faint, grainy green light washing over their faces. Lines of static scrolled, then stabilized into a grid of multiple camera feeds. Elias stared. Damn, it's still running. The screens showed the vineyard from different angles. The gate, the barn, the cellar entrance, even the main road. Analog circuit, Izzy murmured in awe. Completely off-grid, that's why it still works. Elias adjusted a dial, bringing the images into focus. Outside, fog drifted like smoke, the vines moving gently in the wind. And then, across the far left monitor, something shifted. A figure. Human. Tall, moving slow through the mist. Then another, and another. 3 silhouettes in suits, their outlines warping as the fog curled around them. They're here, Elias whispered. On the far right feed, a glint of red cut through the dark. The drone's scanner tracing lazy lines across the fields, pausing over the barn, the house, then angling toward the main hatch leading to the cellar. Izzy's voice was a breath. They know where we are. Elias's hand went to the shotgun, knuckles whitening. Roscoe pressed close, his fur bristling, a low rumble vibrating through his chest. They can't get in, Elias said, though his own voice betrayed uncertainty. This place is sealed. Izzy shook her head. Not sealed enough. If they find the hatch. She didn't finish. Elias scanned the monitors again. The men were closer now. Their shapes ghosted through the fog, precise, deliberate. One stopped, lifting a device, a scanner, small and circular, glowing faint blue. The man turned it toward the ground. A second later, the faint outline of the hidden trap door flickered faintly on the screen. Elias swore under his breath. Then, across another monitor, movement near the far fence. A fourth figure, crouched, wearing something different. Not a suit, but a dark field jacket, a hood pulled over the head. This one moved differently, faster, sharper. Who's that? Izzy whispered. Not with them, Elias said. The figure knelt near the gate, reached into the soil, and placed a small, blinking object, then turned toward the cameras, as if knowing they were being watched, and lifted their gaze directly at the lens. The face was shadowed, but the gesture was unmistakable. A warning. Elias felt his pulse hammer in his ears. Whoever that is, they're not working for Viridian. Roscoe whined softly, eyes fixed on the screen. Outside, the fog thickened until the cameras showed only static and shifting gray shapes. The last thing Elias saw before the feed cut was the drone's red beam sweeping toward the cellar door, steady as an executioner's hand. The fog had thickened into a living thing that night, crawling low over the valley and smothering every sound beyond the walls. The air inside the cellar was heavy with the scent of earth and copper, the faint hum of the old Devereux machinery, the only heartbeat in the dark. Elias sat at the desk, the glow of the terminal reflecting off his tired face as he worked the ancient system to life. Izzy was beside him, fingers trembling over the keyboard, sweat glinting at her temples. Her eyes, a sharp amber brown, flickered between fear and fierce focus. The screen blinked, lines of code and static merging like ghosts. If we can connect the uplink through the relay node, she whispered, we can transmit everything. The research logs, the enzyme sequence, the journal scans. Once it's out, Viridian can't hide it anymore. Elias nodded grimly. Do it. He didn't understand half of what she said, but he knew one thing. Sunlight was the only weapon against something that thrived in shadows. Roscoe lay near the base of the stairs, his head lifted, nose twitching. The old shepherd's ears flicked toward every subtle vibration, the drip of water, the hum of power lines, the faraway rustle of wind beyond the hatch. His fur bristled faintly when a low rumble passed through the ground. Izzy froze, fingers hovering mid-air. What was that? Truck engine, Elias muttered. Or worse. On the monitor, the static shifted, and one of the outer cameras flared to life. A figure moving through the fog, then another, then 3 more. Their suits were darker now, their visors reflecting the pale light like insect eyes. "They're coming," Izzy whispered. "They know." Elias rose, jaw tightening. "We're not ready to run. We hold." He grabbed the old shotgun and a coil of copper wire from the workbench. The years in the Marines had taught him that survival wasn't about strength, it was about time. Buy enough of it, and the world might tilt in your favor. As Izzy worked, the uplink bar crawled slowly across the screen. 32%, 46, 57. Her breathing grew shallow. Come on, she murmured. "Signal's weak. We need to reroute the voltage from the fermentation core to boost it." Elias crouched near the old barrels, tracing the tangle of wires that Devereux had once used for temperature control. The metal pipes gleamed faintly under the light. He found the main conduit, stripped the insulation with his knife, and tied it into a thick grounding rod buried along the foundation. "You sure this won't fry us all?" he asked. Izzy gave a humorless smile. "Only if you touch it." Above them something scraped. A dull clunk echoed from the far corner, the sound of weight shifting against metal. Roscoe shot up, ears forward, eyes blazing. He gave a single, sharp bark towards the old ventilation shaft near the ceiling. Elias followed the sound. The vent cover rattled once, twice, then went, still. He lifted the flashlight. A trickle of dust drifted down. "They're digging through," he said. "They found the vent system." Izzy's voice trembled. "How long before they break through?" "Minutes," Elias said, moving fast. He hauled one of the iron fermentation drums to the far wall, dragging it across the stone floor with a harsh screech. The noise echoed like a warning bell through the vineyard above. Roscoe barked again, tail stiff, moving to stand guard by the hatch. Elias found an old extension cord, spliced it into the power feed of the still-active fermentation unit, and clipped the other end to the metal fence that ran along the property's perimeter. A relic from Devereux's livestock days, still linked through an underground grounding wire. "If they touch that fence," he said, breath tight, "they'll get a taste of the house vintage." Izzy stared at him, realization dawning. "You're turning the vineyard into a live grid." Elias smirked faintly. "Low voltage, just enough to make 'em dance." She turned back to the terminal. Upload, 71%, 83. Her hands were trembling now, the machine's hum rising in pitch. "Almost there." Then came the first scream. It sliced through the night, muffled but raw, carried through the ground like thunder underfoot. A sharp pop of electricity followed, then silence. The cameras flickered. On one feed, the outer fence glowed faintly blue for a split second before returning to black. Smoke drifted in the fog. "That's one," Elias muttered. Izzy swallowed hard, fingers flying. "We're at 93%, just a little longer." Roscoe barked again, sharper this time. Elias turned and saw it. A shadow dropped through the vent, landing heavy on the floorboards. A man in tactical black, visor cracked, hand gripping a stun baton that hummed faintly red. His breathing rasped through the filter mask. Before he could rise fully, Roscoe lunged, slamming into his arm with the force of a sledgehammer. The weapon clattered away. The man shouted, striking wildly. Elias fired once, the blast echoing through the cellar. The intruder fell limp, his mask shattered, blood pooling beneath him. Izzy flinched but kept typing. "Upload complete. The final bar hit 100%, and a soft tone confirmed, data transferred. Secure link closed. She exhaled shakily. It's done. It's out there. Elias dropped the empty shell and turned to her. Then we need to get out. The lights flickered. A surge rolled through the wires, and the old system whined like something alive. The smell of ozone filled the air. Izzy's eyes widened. The voltage feedback, it's climbing too fast. Elias cut the connection, sparks flying from the cables. The screens died one by one until only static remained. Above, footsteps pounded and distant voices barked orders. The men were regrouping. He looked at Roscoe, the dog's fur matted with dust, eyes bright with resolve. Elias crouched, pressing a hand to his head. Good boy. Tonight we guard the last vineyard on Earth. The ground trembled as another explosion sounded near the northern fence. The fog outside turned white with firelight. Izzy stood beside him, her face pale but fierce. They can burn it all, she whispered, but they can't bury the truth anymore. Elias racked the shotgun, the sound echoing through the dark like a promise. Then let's make them work for it. From outside came the low, rising wail of the storm returning, a chorus of wind, metal, and vengeance. The night had turned to ash before dawn. Smoke still drifted from the scorched fence lines, curling into the pale sky like ghosts, unsure whether to rise or linger. Elias stood near the shattered entrance of the cellar, his face streaked with soot, his hands trembling from exhaustion. The uplink was dead. The power lines melted, but the data was out. Somewhere, far beyond the valley, the truth now breathed. Beside him, Izzy paced, her hair tangled and her cheeks smeared with dirt, eyes wide and wild. They'll come again, she said, voice tight. You hurt them. You embarrassed them. Viridian doesn't forgive that. Elias didn't answer. He stared toward the horizon where fog met light. Too still, too perfect. Roscoe sat near his feet, chest heaving, fur streaked with mud and blood. His right ear twitched at every sound. The dog's eyes, amber and sharp, were fixed on the distant rows of vines, the way a soldier watches the edge of an unseen battlefield. Then, the faint hum came. Low at first, almost part of the wind. Engines, multiple, heavy tires grinding against gravel. Izzy froze. They're here! A convoy crested the far ridge. 3 armored trucks, matte gray, with the Viridian insignia faintly visible under layers of dust. The lead vehicle stopped at the main road, and from it stepped a man in a dark field uniform, trimmed with steel-gray lining. Marcus Vale. He was in his mid-50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the posture of someone who'd once worn military command like armor. His hair was black, streaked with silver, combed neatly back, revealing a face carved from stone. Angular jaw, scar slicing from temple to cheekbone, eyes pale as frost. He moved with the precision of a man who had seen too many wars and never left any behind. Vale had once served in private defense contracts before Viridian bought his silence with power. He believed in order, not morality, the kind of man who could burn a town to save a company and still sleep soundly. Elias watched him through the scope of his rifle, lowering it slowly. That's not just another inspector, he muttered. That's their wolf. Izzy swallowed. Marcus Vale, head of corporate security. He runs containment ops. Anything that needs to disappear. Vale raised a hand, signaling his men forward. They spread in perfect formation. 15 of them, clad in black tactical gear, helmets gleaming faintly in the morning light. 2 carried rifles with thermal sights. Another pair wheeled out tanks strapped to their backs, long hoses coiled like serpents. Izzy's eyes widened. Flamethrowers. They're not just here to kill us. They're here to erase everything. Elias's stomach turned cold. They want to burn the enzyme traces, he said. Clean the slate. Vale stepped to the front of the column, his voice booming through a megaphone. Elias Ward, you are in possession of stolen proprietary material belonging to Viridian Cellars. Step out and surrender immediately. This property is under corporate quarantine. His tone was calm, almost bored, as though ordering coffee. You have 5 minutes before we begin sterilization procedures. Izzy grabbed Elias's arm. We can't fight them. There's too many. Elias looked at her, the lines in his face deep under the soot. We're not fighting to win, he said quietly. We're fighting to make sure they don't. He turned to the rusted fuel drums along the wall, the same ones once used for fermentation decades ago. Each was half full of ethanol and residue, volatile and waiting. He began unscrewing the caps, the smell of alcohol rising sharp and sweet. What are you doing? Izzy demanded. You'll blow us all to hell. Elias grabbed a coiled hose and ran it along the ground, leading it through the cellar door toward the vineyard. If they want to sterilize, I'll help them, but we do it on my terms. Izzy's voice cracked. You'll destroy everything, the research, the soil, the truth of what Elara was. Elias paused, looked at her through the flickering light of a lantern. His eyes were calm, even kind. Better to burn a lie than to bottle it. Outside, Vale gave another order. The men fanned out across the vineyard, their boots sinking into the damp earth. Fog thickened again, curling around their legs as if the land itself were reluctant to let them pass. The first spark of the flamethrower hissed to life, a line of fire cutting across the vines. Leaves shriveled, blackened, and fell in slow motion. Elias moved fast, connecting the hose to a cracked fermentation tank, twisting the valve open until the ethanol began to flow down the rows like a river of ghosts. The smell grew overpowering, heady, sweet, intoxicating. Izzy covered her mouth. They'll see the vapors, Elias nodded. Good. Through the haze, Vale lifted his hand. Light it. One of his men turned the nozzle, releasing a stream of flame that roared across the nearest field. Fire caught the fumes instantly, racing outward in brilliant orange waves. The vineyard came alive with flame. Vines burst into sheets of light, barrels exploded like gunfire, and the air turned molten. The heat slammed against the cellar door as Elias pulled Izzy backward. Roscoe howled, a deep, resonant cry that cut through the roar of the fire. It wasn't fear. It was something older, primal, a mourning song for the dying earth. The sound echoed across the valley, carried by the wind, blending with the hiss of burning grapes. Izzy's eyes filled with tears. He's burning the past, she whispered. All of it. The fire spread fast, leaping from post to post, consuming decades of history in minutes. Through the smoke, Elias saw Vale watching from a distance, his expression unreadable, the reflection of the flames dancing in his cold eyes. He lifted the megaphone again. You think this saves you, Ward? You can't bury? What's already in the blood? Elias shouted back, voice hoarse from the heat. Maybe not, but you can't drink it either. He turned toward Izzy. Get to the tunnel, the one behind the fermentation line. Go. Izzy hesitated, tears streaking her soot-stained face. Elias. Now, he barked. Roscoe was already moving, circling the perimeter of the flames, guiding her toward the hidden passage. Elias stayed behind a moment longer, staring at the inferno he'd unleashed. Fire moved across the vines like veins of molten glass, burning away every trace of Devereaux's secret. The air shimmered, and for a fleeting second, through the heat, Elias thought he saw shapes, faces in the smoke, whispering, exhaling like the ghosts of winemakers past. He smiled faintly. Rest now, he murmured. You've done enough harm. Then he turned, following Izzy and Roscoe into the tunnel as the last barrel exploded behind him, the sound like a heart breaking in flame. Outside, the entire valley glowed red. The vines burned, and with them the legacy of Elara, its sin, its beauty, its curse, rising into the dawn as ash. The roar of the explosion rolled through the valley like a wounded god, tearing the silence to shreds. The ground trembled, sending a shower of dust and splinters raining down the stairwell as Elias slammed the hatch shut above them. "Move!" he shouted, gripping Izzy's wrist and pulling her into the narrow darkness below. Roscoe bounded ahead, his thick fur matted with ash, his tail low but steady. The tunnel exhaled a damp breath that smelled of old oak, iron, and forgotten years. The ceiling was low enough that Elias had to stoop, his shoulders brushing against cold stone slick with condensation. Behind them, a second explosion thundered through the vineyard, a deeper, heavier sound that made the walls shudder. Izzy turned back, her eyes wide and shimmering with the red glow from above. "The whole valley's burning," she gasped. "You did it." Elias didn't answer. His jaw was tight, face streaked with soot and sweat, eyes burning with the same fever as the fire outside. He knew he had, and there was no going back. Roscoe stopped at a fork where two tunnels diverged, his nose pressed to the ground, snuffling, ears twitching as he turned to the left passage. Elias trusted him without hesitation. "Go, boy," he murmured. The dog's nails clicked against stone as he led the way through the winding corridor. The deeper they went, the more the walls glowed faintly crimson, light bleeding in through small vents above, the last reflections of the burning vineyard. Every drop of light shimmered off the rivulets of wine, trickling down the walls, forming streams that glowed like veins of molten ruby. The air was humid, thick with the scent of grapes turned to smoke. Izzy stumbled once, her boot sliding on the wet floor. Elias caught her by the elbow, steadying her. She looked up at him through strands of hair plastered to her face. "How far does this go?" "Half a mile," he said between breaths. "Old Devereaux used it to transport barrels to the chapel. Wine for God, sin for the world." A grim smile flickered across his face before fading. "Now it's our lifeline." The tunnel curved, revealing ancient carvings on the walls, Latin inscriptions and faint images of vines coiling around chalices. Izzy slowed for a moment, brushing her fingers over one of them. "They built all this for wine," she whispered, almost reverently. "All this faith, all this stone, for something that could never last." Elias glanced back. "You sound like a priest." "No," she said softly. "Just someone who's seen what people will do for immortality." The third explosion came from directly above, a booming shockwave that made the earth rain down in thick clouds of dust. A section of ceiling cracked open, and from it poured a thin cascade of glowing liquid, wine ignited by flame, spilling down in a torrent of red and gold. It hissed as it hit the cooler floor, steam rising around them like smoke from a sacrifice. Roscoe barked, once stepping back, ears flat, then darted ahead into the shadow. Elias grabbed Izzy again. "Keep moving!" They ran, the sound of their footsteps echoing like a heartbeat. The floor tilted downward now, the air cooler but carrying the acrid scent of burning roots. Far behind, a muffled groan signaled the vineyard collapsing in on itself, the soil caving where fire had hollowed its veins. Izzy coughed, covering her mouth with a torn sleeve. Her skin was pale under the flickering red light, her lips dry and cracked. "Elias, if the tunnel gives way, then we go faster," he cut her off. "There's no turning back." They reached a narrow section supported by wooden beams blackened by time. Elias slowed, his hand brushing against one of them. It flaked apart under his touch. "This place is older than we thought," he murmured. "If it goes, it takes us with it." From behind came the faint, rhythmic thud of boots, distant but unmistakable. Izzy froze. "They followed us?" Elias cursed under his breath. "Vale's not the kind to die in someone else's fire." Roscoe snarled softly, nose lifted to the air. He could smell them, the tang of gun oil, sweat, smoke. Elias raised his finger to his lips, motioning Izzy to silence. They crouched low, inching forward in the dark, each breath a prayer. Through the shadows they saw a faint light ahead, a small grate glowing faintly with daylight. "That's the exit," Elias whispered. "The old chapel vent. It'll get us out above the ridge." Behind them, the tunnel shuddered. A sharp crack echoed, followed by the metallic groan of collapsing beams. Dust filled the air, choking and blinding. "Go, go!" Elias shouted. Roscoe darted ahead, pressing through a gap in the rocks. Izzy crawled after him, her fingers bleeding as she clawed forward. The ground shook again, this time harder. The walls began to buckle. Elias shoved Izzy through the vent's narrow frame just as part of the tunnel floor gave way. A river of flaming wine surged below, swallowing the path they had taken. The air turned searing hot. Elias felt the heat on his face as he pulled himself up, his muscles screaming. Roscoe barked furiously from above, his paws scraping the stone. With a final heave, Elias dragged himself out just as the tunnel mouth collapsed behind him, sealing with a thunderous roar. They fell into silence. The hilltop chapel loomed ahead, half ruined but standing, a weathered structure of white stone and ivy. The morning sun broke through the smoke, lighting the valley below where the vineyard once lay. Now it was nothing but blackened earth and drifting embers. Izzy sank to her knees, chest heaving, tears cutting streaks through the soot on her cheeks. Elias stood beside her, his face unreadable, eyes fixed on the smoldering horizon. Roscoe limped closer, his coat streaked with ash, muzzle gray and wet, eyes reflecting the light of what they had lost. The wind carried the faint, bitter smell of burnt grapes, like the ghost of a harvest that would never come again. Elias finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "It's over." Izzy looked up at him, eyes hollow. "No," she whispered. "It's only changed shape." The old soldier looked down at her, then out across the valley where smoke met sunlight. He wasn't sure if she was right. All he knew was that what they'd done could never be undone. And somewhere beneath their feet, buried in stone and fire, the last of Elara's blood still flowed. Burning, but not gone. The lake caught the evening light like a mirror, rippling with the soft breath of summer. The world seemed gentler now, as if Oregon itself had decided to forgive. The small town of Willamette was wrapped in gold and lavender, its orchards whispering in the wind. On the northern edge of the lake stood a modest cabin of cedar and stone, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. The hand-painted sign above the porch read, "Roscoe's Vine." Inside, the scent of fermenting grapes mingled with the aroma of pine wood and old leather. Elias Ward moved slowly between the barrels, sleeves rolled up, hands stained crimson from crushed fruit. He was leaner now, his hair threaded with silver, his once hardened face softened by the quiet rhythm of honest work. A small scar ran along his jaw, souvenir from the night the vineyard burned. But his eyes, calm and steady, spoke of a man who had finally made peace with the ghosts that once ruled him. Izzy Moreau entered from the back room carrying a basket of fresh grapes. She had changed too. Her dark chestnut hair was now tied loosely, curls framing her freckled face, sun-browned and serene. Gone were the sharp edges of the scientist, always in flight. Here she was grounded, her laughter unhurried, her steps sure. She set the basket down and wiped her hands on her apron. "You still overfill the barrels," she teased. "One day we'll drown in our own vintage." Elias gave a small smile. There are worse ways to go. Their partnership had grown into something wordless, built on trust, grief, and gratitude. There were no grand confessions, no promises of forever. Just the steady heartbeat of shared labor and the knowledge that somehow they had survived. Roscoe lay stretched near the fireplace, his muzzle gray now, one ear twitching with every crackle of wood. Age had slowed him, but not dulled his watchful gaze. He still followed Elias around the vineyard each morning, trotting behind the wheelbarrow, tail flicking lazily like a flag of quiet pride. At night, he would settle by the hearth, guarding the house the way he once guarded the war-torn man who built it. On the far shelf, a single bottle stood apart from the rest, a blackened glass, edges warped by flame. The label was barely legible, but one word remained: Elara. Izzy noticed Elias glancing at it as he cleaned his tools. "You could have thrown that away," she said softly. Elias shook his head. "It's a reminder, not of what we lost, but of what we didn't let survive." Izzy's expression softened. "Viridian tried to make the world immortal. You gave it back its mortality." Later that week, a headline appeared in the local paper: "Viridian sellers faces collapse. CEO under federal investigation." Beneath it, a photograph of Marcus Vale, face gaunt and grim, being led in handcuffs toward a courthouse. The world had learned the truth about the so-called immortal vintage. Hundreds of investors had fallen silent. Laboratories shut down. The project that promised eternal youth had died in fire and scandal. Izzy read the article aloud by the window as Elias washed his hands in a basin. "They're seizing all assets," she said. "Vale claims he acted under orders. Typical." Elias dried his hands and looked out toward the lake. "You can't outsource conscience," he murmured. Izzy folded the paper and smiled faintly. "We didn't just burn a vineyard, Elias. We burned a lie." The sun sank lower, spreading violet across the water. Birds returned to their nests, and somewhere distant, a child's laughter carried through the air. Elias filled 2 glasses from a small barrel marked First Harvest. The wine was simple. Tart, earthy, pure. No enzymes, no enhancements, just grapes, sun, and time. He handed one to Izzy. "To the ones who came before," she said, lifting her glass, "and the ones who will never know." Elias nodded. "And to the dog who kept us alive." Roscoe perked his ears at the mention, tail thumping once. They drank, and for a moment the world was silent except for the sigh of wind against the windows. When night fell, the stars shimmered over the lake, mirrored perfectly in the dark water. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting gentle shadows along the floor. Elias sat in his old chair, Roscoe's head resting on his boots. Izzy dozed nearby, a book slipping from her hand. Elias reached for the Elara bottle one last time, turning it in the firelight. The glass caught the glow like a coal refusing to die. He set it back carefully on the shelf, beside a newer bottle labeled Roscoe's Blend. Then he poured a small glass, deep red, and lifted it towards the dog. "This one's not for eternity, boy," he said quietly, voice thick with the warmth of memory. "Just for the moment we earned." Roscoe's tail moved once, slow and content, eyes half closed but gleaming with the reflection of the flames. Elias took a sip, tasting the honest imperfection of the drink. Outside, the wind carried the faint sweetness of ripened grapes across the lake, mixing with pine and smoke. It was the scent of truth, unpolished, fleeting and real. He leaned back, letting the crackle of the fire fill the silence. For the first time in years, there were no ghosts, no gunfire, no lies buried beneath the soil. Just the quiet rhythm of breath, the slow ticking of the clock, and the heartbeat of a vineyard reborn from ashes. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or shining light. They come quietly, in the way a burned vineyard grows green again, or how a broken man finds peace in an honest glass of wine. Maybe that's how God works, not through eternity, but through moments of grace, forgiveness, and love that still survive the fire. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in small miracles, leave a prayer or thought in the comments, and subscribe to follow more stories where faith and loyalty light the darkest paths. May God bless you, your home, and every loyal soul beside you.